host-microbe interactions, and epidemiology. Prevalence and incidence are two terms that are frequently used specifically in epidemiology to mean prevalence, total number of cases of a particular disease, and incidence, total number of new cases of a particular disease. Now again, these are specific uses in epidemiology. If we were using them in general descriptions of something else, they might mean something totally different. But if we're talking about total number of cases, we'd say prevalence, total number of new cases, incidence, when we're talking about infectious disease. Finding the source of an epidemic. Is an epidemic occurring because of a common source, also known as a point source, or is it person to person, a propagated epidemic or outbreak? Now, frequently, epidemiologists can graph out or plot out the number of cases, prevalence, and or incidence to try to determine what's the source of an epidemic outbreak. A common source outbreak would mean lots of folks would get sick all of a sudden with the same disease. And so when we plot over a period of time the number of cases, in this case the number of new cases, we're going to see a steep increase. And that's what that curve looks like. A very sharp, high peak. That's a good indication of a common source outbreak or a common source, point source epidemic. If, on the other hand, the disease organism is spread from person to person, it's going to take one at a time, or one contacts two, two contact four, so it's a sort of a low, slow increase in the incidence. That's the type of curve that we will see. It has a much lower peak, but notice it's a much longer outbreak in terms of time or duration. So by simply plotting cases, sometimes epidemiologists can get a glimpse or better information about what is the source of an epidemic outbreak. Sometimes scientists plot out over time the reported cases per 100,000 population, and patterns arise. Sometimes diseases cycle from one year to the next, or it could be in terms of different seasons. Frequently, with this type of cyclic disease occurrence, epidemiologists can often predict when a next epidemic or sudden increase should occur. So even though it's a sudden increase, it has some predictability to it. Though it's not 100% perfect in terms of prediction, at least there's some type of guideline where some preparation could be made just in case. Reservoirs of infection are sites where microorganisms can persist and maintain their ability to infect. There are several different types of reservoirs: human, animal, and environmental or non-living. We'll describe those in more detail in the next few slides. Human reservoirs can fall into two categories: passive carriers, which are releasing microorganisms without obvious symptoms, which are also called healthy carriers. Mary Mallon, also known as Typhoid Mary, was an example of a healthy passive carrier. She released Salmonella typhi from her digestive tract on a continual basis, and as such, when she wasn't careful or wasn't aware of how she was maintaining her proper hygiene, she was able to transfer Salmonella typhi as a cook to many of her employers' family members. So, passive healthy carrier, someone who's not sick, but is releasing pathogenic microorganisms from someplace in or on their body. That's a passive reservoir, or a healthy reservoir. more obvious human reservoir is an active carrier. An active carrier is someone who's sick, and at some point during their illness, they're releasing microorganisms, either during the prodromal phase, perhaps definitely the symptomatic phase, and essentially they could transfer that pathogen from them to you when they're in that release phase. So the active carrier, much more obvious when we have someone who has either a chronic viral illness or maybe even an acute illness, but they're obviously sick. An intermittent carrier is a human reservoir, a person who periodically releases disease organism or pathogenic microorganism. Someone who has herpes might be an example of an intermittent carrier. Frequently, in between outbreaks, patients who have herpes are not contagious or communicable. It's often only when they are experiencing an outbreak or obvious symptoms that they could possibly transfer a pathogen from them to you. Though it isn't 100% foolproof, it could be possible for someone with herpes to transmit the virus even if they are asymptomatic. But oftentimes, intermittent carriers are those that have persistent, either acute, long-term illnesses that kind of come and go, or chronic illnesses that, again, the pathogen only emerges occasionally.